The first encounter. The galaxy had always been a place of conflict, peace, and everything in between. For centuries, the different civilizations had battled, formed alliances, and traded. The stars above had witnessed both war and peace, with each race knowing their place in the grand scheme of things. But all of that changed on a quiet day when something none of them could have ever imagined appeared in the sky. A massive shadow appeared out of nowhere on the radar screens of the Empire's most advanced ships. The Empire had always been a strong and well-organized faction, dominating most of the galaxy with its fleet of warships, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming. The warship that appeared was unlike anything they had seen before. It was enormous, its surface reflecting the distant stars as if mocking their power. Its size was incomprehensible, dwarfing the Empire's largest warships by a factor of 10. At first, there was confusion. The shadowed shape on the scanners was too large to be any known ship. Commanders thought it was a mistake, some kind of glitch in the system. But as time passed and the object moved closer, the reality set in. This was no glitch. The warship was real, and it was heading straight for the heart of the Empire. Inside the Empire's control room, the officers stared at the screen, their faces pale. They tried sending signals, but there was no response. They couldn't even make out the shape of the ship. All they could see was the enormous silhouette on their radar, slowly advancing toward them. The system wasn't just silent, it was utterly unresponsive. "What is it?" One officer muttered under his breath, his voice shaky. "What kind of ship is this?" Admiral Drax, the leader of the fleet, stood silently at the front of the room. His mind raced, calculating possible threats. "It's not from any known race," he said, his voice steady despite the shock in the room. "Prepare the fleet. We need to intercept it before it reaches our core systems." The crew quickly got to work. The Empire's fleet, which was known for its speed and power, began to mobilize. Dozens of warships powered up their weapons, their engines humming with energy. This was a standard response. Any unknown object appearing in their space was a potential threat, and they would deal with it swiftly. But as the fleet approached the mysterious warship, something strange happened. They weren't able to get any closer. No weapons fired. No communications were made. The closer they got, the more their ships seemed to lose power. Their systems, once flawless and precise, began to falter. One by one, each ship in the fleet started to lose control. The radar officer stared at his screen, eyes wide with panic. "Admiral, the systems, everything is offline. I can't even initiate a firing sequence." Admiral Drax clenched his fists. The fleet was crippled, its strength useless against this unknown force. But that wasn't the worst part. The warship didn't seem to care about their actions. It was as if the warship had anticipated their every move, staying just out of reach, as if mocking their efforts. A sudden burst of light filled the screen. The warship had fired. The Empire's most powerful ship, the Titan, was instantly disabled. The great battleship, equipped with the most advanced weaponry the Empire had to offer, was nothing more than a dead hulk in space, its energy reserves drained in an instant. "Sir, the Titan is gone," a panicked officer screamed, his voice breaking. "What are we up against?" Admiral Drax stood motionless, staring at the empty void where the Titan had once been. He had never felt such powerlessness in all his years of command. "This is no ordinary enemy. Fall back. All ships fall back immediately." But it was too late. The warship had already moved. In a flash, it was no longer just a distant speck on the radar. It was a vast presence, a power that dwarfed everything the Empire had ever known. Drax's mind raced. What could they do against something like this? They had never faced an enemy so strong, so silent. They had never even seen anything like this warship, and now it was too late to stop it. The Empire was left with no answers, no solutions, and only the knowledge that this warship was far beyond their ability to confront. As their ships scattered in every direction, trying desperately to find a way to escape, they realized that the only thing they could do was run. The silence that followed was deafening. Every commander, every officer, every soldier knew that they were witnessing something far bigger than they could understand. The galaxy had just been introduced to an unimaginable new power, and all they could do was watch in helpless awe as it moved closer. Admiral Drax turned away from the screen, his face grim. He knew one thing for sure: the Empire's way of life would never be the same again. The warship was here, and it was unstoppable. The only question now was whether they could survive long enough to find out why it had come. The first encounter with the warship had shown the Empire something terrifying. They were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy, and the real fight for survival was about to begin. The first encounter continues. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. What had started as a distant anomaly on the radar had now become the single greatest threat to all known civilizations. The Empire's transmission, detailing the fall of the Titan and the mysterious warship's power, was sent out in every direction. The fear it instilled was palpable. News outlets across the galaxy repeated the same message. A new, unbeatable force had arrived, and the very existence of the galaxy was in jeopardy. In every corner of the galaxy, people were talking about it. Leaders, scientists, military officials, they all tried to make sense of the impossible. What kind of technology was this warship using? How could something this powerful exist without anyone ever knowing about it? For the first time in a long time, there was real panic. Planets that had lived in relative peace were now gearing up for war, unsure of what they would face. The galaxy's great powers, the Empire, the Alliance, the Syndicate, had all been thrown into chaos. Their carefully laid plans, their military superiority, meant nothing in the face of such an overwhelming force. The galaxy's council, a body of leaders from various star systems, called an emergency meeting. The room was filled with tension. Members of the council, once able to speak freely about matters of diplomacy and trade, now sat in silence, unsure of how to proceed. Admiral Drax was among them, his face pale and his mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. He had never seen anything like it. The Titan, his pride and joy, had been destroyed in an instant, and now the Empire was scrambling to figure out what to do next. A representative from the Alliance stood up first, his voice shaky. "The warship is coming for us too. We've received reports from our outposts. Ships are being disabled, entire fleets lost in the blink of an eye. What do we do? How can we fight something like this?" Admiral Drax spoke, his voice low but firm. "We don't fight it. Not directly. We need to gather information. We need to learn everything we can about this warship, its systems, and how it works. Until we know more, we can't risk engaging it head-on." But another voice cut in. It was Commander Zira, a representative of the Syndicate, who had always been known for her aggressive approach to warfare. "That's not good enough, Admiral. This warship is already near our core systems. We need to act now, or we'll lose everything." Drax shook his head. "We need to be smart. Charging in recklessly will only lead to more destruction. We need to buy time, gather our fleets, and find a way to understand how this warship operates. If we don't, we'll be wiped out." Zira clenched her fists, but she knew Drax was right. The warship had shown no signs of aggression, but its presence alone was enough to send entire fleets running for their lives. There had to be a way to stop it. There had to be. In the coming days, spies were sent to gather information. Scientists were called upon to study the warship's energy readings and technology. But no one had any answers. The warship moved slowly, almost leisurely, as if it was waiting for something, waiting for the galaxy to make its next move. Meanwhile, the galaxy's military forces began to fall back. They set up defensive positions in major star systems, hoping that the warship would simply pass them by. Some sent out messages, pleading for peace. Others tried to figure out how they could survive without having to confront the warship at all. But as each day passed, the feeling of dread only deepened. The Empire, despite all its power, was no longer the unquestioned leader of the galaxy. There was now something out there, something far beyond their understanding, and it was coming closer. The warship's movements were strange. It didn't attack, at least not in a conventional way. It simply disabled ships, one by one, and moved on. As it got closer to the Empire's capital system, the tension became unbearable. Every ship in the fleet was on high alert, ready to respond to any sign of aggression, but none came. The warship just kept moving forward, as if waiting for something, waiting for the galaxy to react. On the final day before it reached the heart of the Empire, Admiral Drax received a strange transmission. It was a warning from one of the scouts who had ventured too close to the warship. The message was brief and cryptic, just a few words, but they sent chills down his spine. It is not here to fight. It is here to test. The meaning of the message was unclear, but one thing was certain. The warship wasn't just a threat. It was something more, something ancient, something that couldn't be ignored. As the warship closed in, the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And yet, no one knew what would happen next. Would it destroy them all? Would it spare them? Or was it here for something far more terrifying? The first encounter was just the beginning. The galaxy had no choice but to prepare for the unknown. And in the depths of space, the warship's purpose remained a mystery waiting to unfold. Desperation spreads across the galaxy. As the warship moved closer to the heart of the Empire, the fear and uncertainty reached a fever pitch. The galaxy's leaders were at a loss. No one knew what the warship wanted, why it was here, or how to stop it. All they could do was watch in growing horror as it cut through the galaxy like an unstoppable force of nature, moving with an eerie calm that made it all the more terrifying. Planetary defenses were hastily prepared. Civilizations once at peace were now rapidly militarizing. The once proud fleets of the galaxy's most powerful factions now looked weak and small in the face of this unknown threat. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, studying the warship's energy signatures and weapon systems, but nothing provided any real answers. Every time they thought they understood something about it, the warship seemed to defy all logic. Admiral Drax, still reeling from the loss of the Titan, watched helplessly as the Empire's last defenses were deployed. His mind was consumed by thoughts of the mysterious message from the scout, the one warning that the warship was here to test, not to fight. But test what? Was the warship here to assess the Empire's strength, to test its resolve? Or was it part of a much larger game that no one could comprehend? The desperation spread quickly. It wasn't just the Empire that was concerned anymore. The Alliance and the Syndicate had sent messengers, asking for information, offering to share resources, and begging for cooperation. The warship wasn't just a threat to one civilization. It was a threat to all. Some planets, on the brink of collapse, were already beginning to evacuate, fearing that they wouldn't have time to prepare. Others were fortifying themselves, hoping they could hold out until the warship's intentions became clear. But no one truly believed they could withstand it. In a hidden command center on the edge of the galaxy, a group of scientists was desperately working to understand the warship. They had made a chilling discovery. The warship wasn't just technologically advanced. It was powered by an ancient alien energy source, a form of power that no civilization in the galaxy had ever encountered before. The power source was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was as if the warship was harnessing the very fabric of the universe itself, manipulating energy in ways that were impossible to explain. This is beyond anything we've ever known. One of the lead scientists, Dr. Lena Kiris, whispered as she looked at the data on her screen. If we can't figure out how it works, the entire galaxy could be destroyed. Her team had been working tirelessly, trying to decipher the warship's movements, looking for patterns in its behavior. They discovered that, unlike the Empire's ships, which operated on conventional energy sources and propulsion systems, the warship seemed to be almost alive. Its movements were deliberate, calculated. It didn't seem to be following any logical course. They were convinced now that it was testing them, watching them. Meanwhile, the warship itself remained silent. It didn't engage in battle. It didn't speak. It simply appeared, disabled ships, and continued its slow march through the galaxy. The absence of violence was almost more unsettling than if it had been destroying everything in its path. The warship's mere presence had been enough to send entire fleets fleeing, and now the galaxy's leaders were grappling with a terrifying question. Was it waiting for them to make the wrong move? Or was it biding its time for something far more ominous? The growing sense of helplessness began to spread even further. High-ranking officials from the Empire, the Alliance, and the Syndicate held secret meetings, trying to form a united front. Their greatest hope was that by combining their resources and knowledge, they might be able to find a way to communicate with the warship, or at the very least, slow it down long enough to understand what it wanted. But no one had any real answers. Their defenses were useless, their technology outdated compared to the power of the warship. All they had was fear. As the warship came closer to the Empire's capital, a chilling silence fell over the galaxy. The warship's movements were slower now, as if it were studying the very fabric of galactic civilization. Its presence was felt everywhere. The people, the leaders, the military, they all knew that the galaxy was facing something far greater than any war they had ever known. Admiral Drax's mind was consumed with one thought. How long could they survive like this? The warship wasn't just a threat to the Empire. It was a threat to the entire galaxy. Every move they made seemed to bring them closer to total destruction. But as the days passed, Drax began to notice something strange. Despite the warship's overwhelming power, there had been no direct confrontation, no declaration of war. It didn't destroy entire fleets on sight. It simply disabled them, leaving them powerless in the cold void of space. What does it want? Drax asked aloud, standing in front of a view of the endless stars. His voice was barely a whisper, but the fear in it was clear. No one had an answer. No one could even begin to understand. But one thing was certain. The galaxy's way of life was changing. The warship's test had begun, and no one knew how it would end. The question was no longer whether they could fight back. The question was whether they could survive long enough to discover why the warship was here and what it would do next. As the warship moved ever closer, the galaxy held its collective breath, knowing that whatever came next, it would change everything. The galaxy's last stand. The warship's relentless advance toward the heart of the Empire had brought the galaxy to the brink. The leaders of the Empire, the Alliance, and the Syndicate now found themselves united in a desperate attempt to hold back the unknown enemy. For the first time in history, the galaxy's greatest powers set aside their differences, pooling their resources to face a common foe. Yet, despite their combined strength, the warship remained an unsolvable mystery. Its technology, its motivations, and even its vulnerabilities remained hidden. The combined fleet, a formidable force of warships, cruisers, and smaller fighter ships, assembled at the outskirts of the Empire's capital system. It was the largest military assembly in centuries, and it was their last hope. Every ship was armed to the teeth, with every available weapon powered and ready. It was a show of force, a desperate display of power against an enemy that had already proven to be beyond their reach. Admiral Drax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Fury, staring at the vast expanse of space. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and fears. Despite the massive fleet surrounding him, he couldn't shake the feeling that their chances of victory were slim. The warship's ability to disable entire fleets without even engaging in a fight was a testament to its overwhelming strength, and the longer they waited, the more certain he became that their very survival was at stake. "We're ready, Admiral," came the voice of his tactical officer. "The fleet is prepared for action." Drax nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the warship, which was now visible to the naked eye. An enormous shadowy figure floating in the distance, its surface gleaming with an almost unnatural light. There was no sound, no signal from the warship. It simply hovered, waiting, as if daring them to make the first move. "We can't just wait any longer," Drax said, his voice low but filled with determination. "Order the fleet to move in. We'll engage it and show the galaxy that we won't back down." The fleet began to move, slowly at first, as the ships gathered their momentum. The first few moments were tense, as every commander in the fleet was hyper-aware of the warship's immense power. They could feel the weight of the decision they were making. With every second that passed, they knew they were getting closer to the point of no return, but they had no other choice. As they closed in on the warship, the battle began. It wasn't a conventional fight, as most of the fleet's weapons had no effect on the warship. The warships launched their missiles, fired their energy beams, and deployed fighter ships, all in an attempt to overwhelm the warship's defenses. But each shot seemed to bounce harmlessly off the warship's surface, as if it were made of something far stronger than anything they could comprehend. The first few waves of attacks were ineffective. In a matter of seconds, the warship retaliated, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of firing massive destructive blasts, it released an energy pulse that sent shockwaves through the attacking fleet. Entire ships were disabled in an instant, their systems fried, their engines shut down. A few moments later, they became drifting hulks in space. The scale of the destruction was immediate and staggering. The fleet's formations were broken, their coordination disrupted. The sheer power of the warship was like nothing they had ever experienced. But the more the fleet struggled to fight back, the more it became clear that they were not dealing with a traditional enemy. This wasn't a war to be won with firepower or tactics. They were up against something far more advanced, something that didn't need to fight at all to make them crumble. A captain from one of the Allied ships tried to radio the fleet. "We can't win this. We're outmatched." His voice crackled with panic. "It's too powerful. We need to fall back." Admiral Drax listened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He had always been a leader, always ready to face any threat head-on. But this was different. The warship's power was absolute. And the longer they fought, the more certain he became that they were playing into its hands. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice stern but filled with the bitter reality of their situation. "All ships, retreat immediately. Get as far away as possible." But even as they turned to flee, the warship's presence seemed to loom over them. The few remaining ships in the fleet struggled to disengage, their engines barely functioning as they moved to escape the warship's grasp. The warship didn't pursue them. It simply watched, as if waiting for them to make their next move. The retreat was chaotic. Ships that had once been powerful war machines were now little more than vulnerable targets, drifting aimlessly in the void. The fear that had gripped the hearts of every soldier, every officer, and every civilian was now a crushing weight on the galaxy's leadership. They had failed. The warship had proven that nothing they did could stop it. They were powerless in the face of something so far beyond their understanding. Admiral Drax stood on the bridge of the Fury, watching as the remaining fleet scattered in all directions. He had given the order to retreat, but in the back of his mind, he wondered if it was already too late. The warship wasn't just a threat. It was a force of nature, unstoppable and indifferent to their struggle. And now, with the fleet in disarray, the galaxy was left with one horrifying truth. The warship wasn't just a weapon. It was a harbinger of something far greater, something the galaxy had no hope of facing. The battle had been lost, and with it, the hope of a quick victory. But the warship's true purpose remained a mystery, and the galaxy could only brace itself for whatever came next, fleeing for survival. As the remnants of the fleet scattered into the depths of space, there was a palpable sense of doom hanging in the air. The warship had made its point. The galaxy's greatest military powers were no match for it. Entire fleets, once the pride of their respective factions, had been reduced to drifting wrecks, their systems completely disabled by a single pulse from the warship. The fear that had slowly been creeping across the galaxy now turned into full-blown panic. Planetary governments, who had hoped the warship's movements were a mere bluff, were now scrambling for answers. The capital worlds of the Empire, the Alliance, and the Syndicate began to prepare for the worst. Evacuations were underway, with entire cities and populations being relocated to underground bunkers or hastily constructed space stations. But even the thought of evacuating entire planets was daunting, as the warship could disable entire fleets with a mere flick of its power. There was no guarantee that anyone would escape its wrath. In a hidden laboratory, deep in the heart of the Empire's strongest research station, a group of scientists worked tirelessly to understand the warship. They had analyzed every scrap of data they could gather from the brief encounters with it. They knew it wasn't just an unstoppable weapon. It was something far more intelligent and purposeful. They had come to one chilling conclusion. The warship was not here to destroy the galaxy. It was here to test its inhabitants. It was a probe, an ancient intelligence sent from beyond the galaxy's known borders, measuring the strength, resilience, and resolve of the galaxy's civilizations. "This is worse than we thought," Dr. Lena Karis, one of the leading scientists, muttered. "We've been tested, not just attacked. The warship is here to gauge us. If it wanted to destroy us, it would have already done so." But this knowledge offered little comfort. If the warship was merely testing them, that meant the galaxy was being judged, not just by an advanced weapon, but by an intelligence beyond their comprehension. What would be the result of this test? What would it mean if the galaxy failed? Meanwhile, a small group of survivors, including Admiral Drax, had made their way to a secret base on the edge of the galaxy. The fleet's loss weighed heavily on them. They had failed to protect the core worlds, and now they were running for their lives, uncertain of what awaited them. The group consisted of high-ranking officers, engineers, and a few scientists who had been working on an experimental ship, a vessel that could potentially withstand the warship's power and perhaps even stop it. "We need to find a way to strike back," Admiral Drax said, his voice filled with frustration. He stood in front of a holographic map of the galaxy, the stars stretching out before him like a vast sea. "We can't just keep running. If we don't act soon, there won't be anything left to save." One of the scientists, a young engineer named Rin, stepped forward. "Admiral, we've been working on something that could help us. It's not a weapon per se, but it could give us a chance to understand the warship better." Drax turned, his eyes narrowing in interest. "What do you mean? What have you found?" Rin looked down at the data pad in his hands. "We've been studying the energy signatures of the warship. It's like nothing we've ever encountered before, but we think we've located a pattern. It's possible that the warship's power source is tied to a specific frequency. If we can disrupt that frequency, we might be able to weaken it, just enough to disable it long enough for us to analyze its core systems." The room fell silent as the implications of Rin's discovery set in. It wasn't a direct way to destroy the warship, but it could give them a fighting chance. If they could find a way to disrupt the warship's energy systems, they might be able to weaken it enough to gather crucial intelligence, to understand its weaknesses, or even disable it temporarily. "We need to act quickly," Rin continued. "If we can get close enough to the warship, we might be able to deploy a device that will disrupt its power systems. But we'll need to get within range, and that will mean getting past its defenses. It's a long shot." Admiral Drax considered the plan. It wasn't much, but it was the only hope they had. They didn't have the luxury of time. The warship was moving relentlessly closer to the final capital systems, and soon it would be too late to stop it. "Prepare the ship," Drax ordered. "We'll take the risk. It's our only chance." As the survivors scrambled to prepare for their mission, fear and uncertainty weighed heavily on them. They were about to take a leap into the unknown, hoping that this experimental technology would give them the edge they needed. But even if it worked, they still didn't know if they could survive long enough to deploy it. In the streets of the galactic capitals, panic spread. People who had once lived in comfort now found themselves packing their belongings, ready to flee at a moment's notice. Ships filled with refugees were leaving the planets, heading for distant systems in search of safety. But with the warships still advancing, no place was truly safe. The galaxy's great powers were at the mercy of something they didn't understand. The galaxy was running out of time, and the only thing standing between them and total annihilation was a small group of survivors, a daring plan, and the hope that they could disrupt the warship's power before it was too late. As the survivors prepared for their mission, they knew one thing for certain. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. The final hope. The small group of survivors, including Admiral Drax, Rin, and a handful of elite officers, worked tirelessly to prepare their experimental ship for the mission. Time was running out. The warship's relentless march toward the heart of the galaxy continued, and the fragile hope that they could stop it seemed to dwindle with each passing moment. The ship they had built was a sleek, experimental vessel, equipped with the new technology they hoped would give them a chance. It was different from anything the galaxy had ever seen, designed to operate in stealth, with advanced shielding and a power source that could potentially disrupt the warship's own energy system. The device they planned to deploy was a one-time use only, a last-ditch attempt to weaken the warship's defenses long enough for them to gather critical intelligence or disable it temporarily. As they boarded the ship, the air was thick with tension. They all knew the risks. Getting close to the warship was nearly impossible. Its defenses were formidable, and its ability to disable entire fleets with a single pulse was beyond anything they could match. But it was their only option. The galaxy's last hope lay in this risky mission. Rin sat at the controls, his fingers moving over the intricate systems as he fine-tuned the ship's functions. The ship's ready, Admiral. We're equipped with everything we've got, but we'll need to get within range of the warship's energy field before we can deploy the device. It's risky, but it's our best chance. Admiral Drax stood near the viewport, staring out into the cold vastness of space. His mind was focused, his thoughts sharp. They had no backup, no reinforcements. This mission had to succeed. If it didn't, the galaxy would be lost, and the warship would continue its march unchecked. Good, Drax said, his voice steady. Let's get this done. We don't have much time. The ship's engines hummed to life, and with a soft lurch, they were off. The group set their course, heading toward the warship's location, navigating through the debris of destroyed fleets that still floated in the vast emptiness of space. It was a grim reminder of what awaited them if they failed. The warship loomed ahead, a dark shadow against the backdrop of distant stars. As they approached, the tension in the ship's small control room was almost unbearable. The crew was silent, each person knowing the significance of what they were about to attempt. The warship's presence was oppressive, its sheer size and power almost overwhelming. Rin's voice broke the silence. We're entering its energy field. The warship hasn't reacted yet, but I can feel the pull of its power. We need to stay undetected. Admiral Drax nodded. The stealth systems of their ship were designed to avoid detection, but they couldn't guarantee it would work. If the warship detected them, it would be the end of their mission, and possibly their lives. As they got closer, the warship's shape became clearer. It wasn't just a ship. It was a colossal structure, like an ancient, malevolent city drifting through space. Its surface shimmered with an eerie energy, a deep, glowing light pulsing from within. It was alive with power, and as they drew nearer, the crew could feel the weight of it pressing down on them. We're close enough, Rin said, his voice tense. I'm initiating the deploy sequence. With a deep breath, Drax stood from his seat and walked over to the device, a small but intricate piece of technology that would hopefully disrupt the warship's power system. They had only one shot. The device was designed to send out a signal at a specific frequency that, if successful, would temporarily scramble the warship's energy field. But it would only last for a short time, long enough for them to gather vital data or potentially disable its core systems. Rin worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'm activating the disruptor. In 5 seconds, we'll be in range." The countdown seemed to stretch on forever, the tension rising with each passing second. Drax's heart pounded in his chest, knowing that everything hinged on this one moment. He exchanged a glance with the others, and they all understood the gravity of the situation. If they failed, there would be no coming back. "Now," Ren called out, and with a sharp motion, he activated the device. A low hum filled the ship as the disruptor sent out its pulse, directed at the warship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if in response to the pulse, a massive wave of energy rippled from the warship, and the entire ship shuddered. The warship had reacted. The device worked. The warship's energy field flickered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The pulse had weakened the warship's defenses, leaving a temporary window of vulnerability. The crew's hope surged as they realized that they might actually have a chance to succeed. "Deploy the data probes," Drax ordered. "We need as much information as we can get before it recovers." Ren quickly deployed small data probes, each one designed to collect as much data as possible about the warship's energy systems, its internal structure, and any other vital information that could help them understand the enemy. The probes darted toward the warship, weaving between the energy pulses that now seemed to fluctuate erratically. Minutes passed like hours as the probes collected data and transmitted it back to their ship. Drax watched the streams of information flood the screen, his mind racing to process the data. What they were discovering was nothing short of extraordinary. The warship wasn't just a weapon. It was a repository of ancient knowledge. It was not just designed to destroy. It was built to test, to analyze, to understand civilizations. The data was overwhelming, and within it was the key to understanding how the warship operated, and possibly how to stop it. But the window of opportunity was closing quickly. The warship was already beginning to recover from the disruptor pulse. Energy levels were stabilizing, and its systems were coming back online. "Get us out of here," Drax barked. Now, the crew worked quickly to retract the probes and navigate their ship away from the warship, but as they pulled away, the warship sent out another pulse of energy. This time, it wasn't a gentle wave. It was a destructive blast, sending shockwaves through the ship's hull. "Brace for impact," Ren yelled, but it was too late. The ship rocked violently, alarms blaring as the hull cracked. But they had done it. They had gathered the data they needed. And now, with the information in hand, they could finally begin to understand the warship, its true purpose, and perhaps how to stop it before it was too late. But escaping wasn't the end of their mission. It was only the beginning. The data they had collected would change everything. And now, they had to find a way to use it. The ultimate sacrifice and victory. The small experimental ship, battered and damaged from the warship's retaliation, limped through space. The crew was exhausted, shaken by the narrow escape, but they had accomplished what no one else had thought possible. They had gathered critical data that could hold the key to the warship's defeat. As the crew made their way back to their base, they knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a new battle, one they couldn't afford to lose. Admiral Drax stood at the front of the bridge, looking at the flickering readouts on the control panel. The warship's power was nearly limitless, its defenses nearly impenetrable, but the data they had collected was invaluable. It had provided them with insights into the warship's energy systems, its alien technology, and perhaps most importantly, the secret to disabling it. It was a breakthrough, but it wasn't a solution. "We can't stop now," Drax said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We have to use this information. We can't let everything we fought for be in vain." Ren, his face weary but resolute, sat at the main console, reviewing the data they had retrieved. "Admiral, I've analyzed the energy fluctuations from the warship. We can exploit a weakness in its power grid, but we'll need to get close enough to deploy a full-scale disruptor. It won't be easy." Drax nodded. "We'll need to build a team." We're going to have to get close to the warship again. This time, we'll use everything we have. We've come this far, and we can't turn back now." The plan was risky. They had only one shot at this. The warship was still advancing toward the capital systems, and the longer they waited, the more catastrophic the consequences would be. A final assault was their only option, but this time, it would require a sacrifice. As the fleet began to assemble in a hidden corner of the galaxy, the leaders of the Empire, the Alliance, and the Syndicate gathered for one last council meeting. They had already lost so much, and now they faced the grim reality that the only way to stop the warship was through a final desperate strike. Every faction had been hit hard, but there was no turning back. The warship's advance had to be stopped. "We've seen what this enemy is capable of," Drax said, addressing the council. "It's a force unlike any other. But we have a plan. We've discovered how to disrupt its power systems, how to make it vulnerable. We need your fleets, your support, but the cost may be high." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They had all witnessed the destruction the warship could cause, but now they understood that this was not just a military conflict. This was a battle for survival. The decision was unanimous. The galaxy would make one final stand. Admiral Drax, accompanied by Rin and the team of specialists, boarded their flagship. The experimental ship had been upgraded, equipped with the newly developed disruptor device that could disable the warship's core energy systems. But this time, they weren't just gathering data. They were going to strike. They would get close enough to deliver the disruptor, knowing it would likely mean their own destruction. As the fleet approached the warship, the galaxy's forces held their breath. The warship was massive and silent, but its presence was suffocating. The attack was about to begin. The fleet would move in, creating a distraction, while Admiral Drax and his team made their final approach. If they succeeded, they would disable the warship long enough to give the galaxy's forces a fighting chance. If they failed, it would mean the end of everything. "Prepare for the final assault," Drax ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We don't have much time." The fleet moved forward, unleashing a wave of firepower, trying to draw the warship's attention. The warship's energy defenses flared to life, countering each attack with ease. It was as if the warship were toying with them, testing their resolve. The final stand had begun, and the galaxy's last hope was now in the hands of a small group of survivors. As Drax's ship broke through the warship's outer defenses, the crew worked quickly to deploy the disruptor. The ship shook as it entered the warship's inner energy field. The feedback from the disruptor device was overwhelming. The ship was being pulled in, its systems beginning to fail under the immense energy field. The warship was responding. It wasn't going to allow them to get close. "Activate the disruptor," Drax shouted, bracing for the impact. Rin pressed the button, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The warship's energy field flickered as the disruptor pulse shot out, connecting with the warship's core. There was a blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening silence. The ship shuddered violently, and alarms blared as systems began to fail. The warship's energy grid had been breached, but the price was steep. The ship's systems were failing rapidly. The disruption pulse had worked, but it had overloaded their own systems in the process. Drax knew they didn't have much time. The warship's defenses would begin to recover soon, and they had no way of escaping. "Get to the escape pods," Drax ordered. "We need to leave now." Rin looked at him, his face filled with disbelief. "Admiral, we're too close to the core. There's no way out." Drax turned, his expression solemn but determined. "We've done our job. The galaxy will survive because of this. Get the data to the fleet. Tell them, we won." With those final words, Drax and his team activated the self-destruct sequence on their ship, ensuring that the information they had gathered would be transmitted back to the galaxy. As the countdown began, the ship started to break apart, the destruction of the warship's core sending shockwaves throughout its structure. The warship, weakened but not destroyed, sent out one final pulse of energy in a desperate attempt to regain control. But it was too late. The disruptor pulse had done its job, and the warship's core systems were now completely disabled. The remaining ships in the fleet rallied, seeing the opportunity. They launched a full assault, now able to damage the warship's outer defenses, and slowly, with painstaking effort, they managed to bring it down. In the end, the warship was destroyed. The galaxy was saved. But the victory came at a cost. The crew of the flagship, led by Admiral Drax, had made the ultimate sacrifice. Their mission had succeeded, and they had ensured the survival of the galaxy, but their names would be remembered only as heroes lost in the final battle. The galaxy would rebuild, but the memory of the warship and the sacrifices made to stop it would live on, a testament to the resilience, bravery, and determination of those who had refused to let the darkness claim their future.